Hello, everyone. I am Rebekah Campbell, and welcome very much to my book launch. I just want to note at first that the book launched on last Friday. We were hoping to run an event in person next week in Sydney. I know not everyone is in Sydney, but there's a lot of people joining today who are at home in lockdown. And I just want to thank you so much for coming out and supporting me and supporting this book and attending our launch. So this is going to be a bit different to what we would do if we were meeting in person and we were drinking wine and signing books. But I think it's going to be hopefully we can do it differently and make it even better. So we've got today, the format is I have the amazing Naomi Simpson joining, who I'll introduce in a second. We're going to talk books, business, love, and everything in between, as I've said. So we'll start by sharing some stories from the book. We've also got three characters from the book, real people who are part of the story, who have very kindly agreed to join us as well today. So if you have read the book, you'll get to meet three of the most important, wonderful characters in the book. And we'll also have a chance for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question to me or Naomi or any of the guests, please put the question in the Q&A. So I now am very excited to introduce my wonderful friend, Naomi Simpson, and an incredible inspiration to many business women in Sydney and across Australia. Founder of Red Balloon, also one of the stars of Shark Tank, and a best-selling author yourself of Live What You Love and Ready to Soar. So Naomi, I just want to start by saying how this book came about, because it was actually your idea. So we were having lunch a few years ago now. It must have been around 2017, something like that. I do remember having a baby in a high chair at your house. Rod, my partner Rod, and your lovely husband Stu, and we were sitting around, and I remember you asked me, so how did you guys meet? And I said, well,
there went an hour.
Yeah, let me tell you the story about how we met. And I remember you said you should write that story. And at the time I was writing a lot of business columns, and I was actually talking to a publisher about writing a business book. But I remember you saying you should write that story, and that was what planted the seed in my head. So I thought, who better to run today with me than you? So thank you so much for joining us.
So my pleasure. And I remember that moment too, because I was spellbound by the story, and I also thought it was a story that a lot of other people might experience. They spend a lot of energy and a lot of time on their careers, and might not be looking to the other areas of their life. And I also had, whenever I can or whenever I see them, I read your columns, and they have this warmth to them, the real energy. So I'm really, really glad that you took this advice. And I understand that when I got the manuscript, and it was Easter this year, and a rainy Easter, and I flicked the first page. I go, okay, I'll be able to skim this. Well, I couldn't put it down, and I knew what happened in the story. So I think that was really great and very brave. But why did you write the book, apart from the fact that I thought it was a great suggestion? But, why did you actually write the book?
So it's a long story, I guess, but that was your idea. The idea was planted in my head, was that one day I should write that story. But at the time, I was quite focused on writing a business book. And you had introduced me to your publisher, actually. Now I remember where the idea came from. And so I was working on this business book, and I found myself getting up every day and really slogging it out, trying to get this. It was like a kind of a women careers business idea. It wasn't super clear, but it just wasn't inspiring me. I was kind of bored writing it, and I felt like if I was bored writing it, people weren't going to be excited. and I also felt like, was I really put on this planet to tell this story? And at the same time, so it would have been 2018. I had a 2-year-old, and I was pregnant, or almost 2-year-old, I think, and I was pregnant with Bobby, our little boy, and I had been through this experience where my life had completely changed, where I had gone 10 years. So, I mean, if you know the story, my first love was sadly killed in a car accident, and then I just didn't date for a really long time. I got completely stuck and very narrowly focused on my career. But I was really lonely. And just to give you an example, I remember my 37th birthday, because I got really annoyed with people messaging on Facebook on my birthday. So I turned off birthday on Facebook, and I remember waking up on my 37th birthday. Maybe a couple of friends who knew, like really close friends who were in Sydney, texted me, and my mum called me, but that was it. And I went to a cafe and bought myself breakfast, and it was just a pretty lonely experience, like just a lonely experience. And then I was dating hardcore at that stage, as you'll know if you read the book. But it wasn't that long after that I met Rod, and it was like my life changed. It was instant, and it was, I can't describe it any differently than it was like walking into a different universe or something. It was like waking up next to someone who loved me and who I loved, and going out for coffee and planning holidays together, and then having a beautiful child. It was like my heart was just so full. And I just remember thinking constantly how lucky I am and how I could have missed this. And I thought if there was anyone else out there, I just wanted to share this story. If I could in any way encourage people to keep going, or lend some of my experience in this particular area of life, this was what I was put here to do.
Yeah. And look, I do think the book is very vulnerable. Like, you allow people into a very intimate you. And given that you are a business person, that's how we first met, as fellow entrepreneurs. And this business journey that you have, and I did absolutely love sitting underneath the book, was your business journey. Like, it wasn't that just stopped. It wasn't that it went away. It wasn't that you were all in here, but that there's a richness to this book, that there is several layers, and it does show us as whole people. That's one thing that I came out. But how do you feel about revealing such intimacy to other people?
It's scary. It definitely is scary. I won't say that it's not. I think, when someone did say something, also when I was thinking about the idea for the book, is to make your mess your message. And it was really obvious to me that my mess in my life was not really, but it was my personal life and how I turned that around. But I remember thinking, what's the scariest thing I could ever say? And that was that I didn't go on a date in 10 years. And then when I started writing, I was like, oh my, that's like nothing compared to what I actually have to say here. And as soon as I started writing it, I could see that the only way that it was going to work is if I was completely honest and just wrote completely from my heart and was willing to share every, misguided thought, every rejection, humiliating moments. Otherwise, the book wasn't going to work. And I just thought, I don't know. And I also kind of thought, we talked about this. I turned 40 a few years ago, and not that long ago, but this funny thing happens in your 40s, which is people die. And I just didn't experience that in my 30s and 40s. And I remember just thinking, like, one day when I die, hopefully in a long time, I'm not going to care what anyone else thought of me. I'm not going to look back and go, I wish I'd really refined that image. I'm just going to care that I shared from my heart, and I shared what I knew and what I'd learnt, and hopefully entertain people and contributed in some way. So,
as I said, I couldn't put it down, and I completely concur with you. It's your ability to be vulnerable, and the language is rich. So it's not like it's a business book. You'd think it was a romance novel. Well, that's right. That's what it is. And I suppose for many people who've spent a lot of time in business, it's a side of ourselves that we may well deny. And that's why I thought it was particularly interesting. And my own story with Stuart, I was in a very similar circumstance.
Yes.
So
you were part of the inspiration. I remember us having this talk many years ago before I made the decision to date. So you were married for a long time and then decided, I'd love you to share the story.
Oh, okay. Well, I was married for 20 years and have 2 beautiful children and started a business and so forth. But the relationship came to a natural end. We weren't growing together. We'd grown apart, and our children had grown up, and they were on their own journeys. And I realized I was really isolated inside my marriage. And as such, I didn't, and because I'm a terribly loyal person, I never said anything bad particularly about my husband. I just bottled everything up, and I didn't let people in. And then it came to pass that he too wasn't happy, and we just, what do they call it, an amicable departure. And I was facing being on my own for the rest of my life. And that's quite daunting. But equally daunting was the idea of ever dating. Like, just after being with one person for 20 years, the notion of, and I would go to the market with my girlfriend, Margie, and she had, 3 girls, and she'd go and then she'd buy all of this food, and I'd buy 1 carrot, 1 tomato, and, 1 zucchini for the whole week. And next week I still didn't need to buy them because I hadn't eaten them. So I felt very sorry for myself because my kids had left and, I was on my own. And so just me and the dog. And anyway, we were invited, both of us were invited to a party, and she said, oh, there's every single man in Sydney will be there, this friend will be trying to matchmake us. And I said, I'm never dating. I'm never going out with anybody. Oh, don't be silly. I'm just out of a relationship. And she said, sweetie, it's pretty slim pickings out there. She either said that or she said, beggars can't be choosers. She said one or the other, and I don't really know. But it got me into action because I had thought, look, that's not something I just don't want to really think about or deal with. And as such, then the next time we went to the market, which was the next weekend, I said to her, I've been on 3 dates this week. And she said, what do you mean you've been on 3 dates? I've been separated for 3 years and haven't been on 1 date. What are you talking about? And I said, oh, they just didn't know they were on dates. I just started saying yes to things that I usually would say no to because I realized I just had to meet different sorts of people. And one of those, it came into my inbox. It was a LinkedIn thing. Could we meet for coffee? Perhaps our businesses can do business together. And we had coffee, which turned into a drink, which turned into dinner. And then I turned to Stu, and I was in Melbourne, and I said, oh, look, I've got these 2 events coming up. Would you be my date? Like, I asked him, would he come on this date with me? And they were both at the dockside of this gig, and they were in exactly the same venue one night after the other. And this very first event which we went to, which was the Ernst Young's Entrepreneur of the Year, of which I was up for an award, and we sat down, and you know how they do, chicken and beef or whatever, on the pasta and salad, and he just automatically swapped them over because he'd heard me say I just don't eat wheat, and the person across the other side of the table said, oh my God, how long have you 2 been married? The old married couple. It was our first date. And here we are now. And I know very much we encouraged, we were married 5 years ago. We've been together for 10 years and he's the love of my life. And I absolutely adore him. Every day. I feel grateful. I feel so grateful to have him in my life, but I also understand contrast. So I'm also grateful for the 20 years I had with Pete. So, it just is. And we got married for our kids because we have 4 kids between us. And as soon as we made that decision, they saw us very much as family rather than mum's boyfriend or dad's girlfriend. Yeah. So I know you know that story too.
No, it's a lovely story. My thing that I remember about that story, other than Stu obviously being gorgeous for swapping the plates over, was that you had made a decision, right? And you didn't go on 138 dates like me. I think you said you went on 3 or 5 or something. Maybe it was 5 coffees in the end or something, but it was not a huge number. But the point was that you made a conscious decision, and that and the other thing I wanted to just call out from there was just that we all know you as this very powerful, successful businesswoman. But actually, from what I know you, from knowing you as a friend, what really brings you joy is your relationship and what you 2 do together, and it's just so important. It's lovely.
Yeah, and how we've recreated family and what family looks like for us, and a blended family which is full of laughter and love and joy and respect, and it is very, very special. But you're quite right. I made a choice. I said I have to extend my realm. I'm not going to meet anybody if I keep doing the same thing and going and meeting the same people over and over. And I'm definitely not meeting anybody at work, which is a question I had for you, because that sits underneath and in the book is about meeting people at work. Because you met, in addition to the kind of the 138 dates and the program of work and that you put behind that, you were meeting people in a very male entrepreneurial startup world in both Australia and the US. And there was some energy in some of those spaces. So what do you think about, meeting people at work when we are actually living in a time of, Me Too and be careful, and is it appropriate, and those sorts of things? What's your opinion on that?
So, I mean, all I can share my story, I think, and that is that, yes, I did. I mean, I raised capital, obviously, and so I think I worked out I pitched at least 500 times, and it would have been probably 498 of those pitches would have been to men. And yeah, I built close relationships with investors. I remember once going down my cap table, and every single person on the cap table was a man that had invested. So I was in close relationships with many men in business. There was one, and there's a character in the book, for those who've read it, called Cameron, who is a combination of different male relationships. So it's the only character that I kind of made up to some extent out of more than one person. And that was just really for simplicity, just having all these different male characters kind of coming in and out, who were all kind of performing the same role in my life, which was an investor / mentor. And there was one of those men who I did develop feelings for. I think there was a little flirtation there. He was much older than me. He wasn't married, but it was never going to go anywhere. And I don't know, I could say that was wrong, but I'm just being honest. I did develop those feelings. I'm glad that I didn't take it anywhere. I did draw a line that I didn't want to cross. But if I'm honest, it was kind of fun to some extent. I enjoyed the relationship, and we're still friends. But there was one story in the book, which was a creepy investor who hit on me.
You have dinner with, and he says he's going to invest, and then he didn't.
But I didn't. And I think so. He had agreed. It was at a time when the company was about to run out of money. I really needed investment. He was over from New York and agreed at dinner. We're at the Rockwell restaurant. I can still picture it. And he'd agreed at the beginning of dinner, like, yes, I'm in for 100K, put me down for 100K. And then he just wanted to have a question. He's like, I want to know more about Rebekah, which is totally normal as you get to know people when you're raising money. But then at the end of the date, he moved around next to me and said, I just want to address the elephant in the room here. And that's you and me want to. And I was like, oh, what do I do? So I think I was polite about it. I obviously said no, and I have to go now. But I wish, in hindsight, that I had responded with more outrage. Even though it's not illegal to proposition someone after you've just agreed to invest, and it's still something that I wish I had been more clear about how wrong it was, so that hopefully he thinks twice about doing it again. And I wish I'd shared it at the time as well. And hopefully that experience might have empowered other women. Hopefully it does now. It's in the book, so that if other women find themselves in that position, they'll might have thought about how they would respond, and respond with a bit more powerfully than I did. I think we might have lost Naomi briefly. So hopefully Naomi can get back into the call, but I'm sure she will. I might bring on board Ruth. So Ruth, would you like to join us? So those of you who have read the book, can we unmute Ruth? Here she is. So Ruth is my psychologist, who I saw first in 2007, I think it was, for a year. At the time, I was running quite a successful music company, and I was very lonely. I was having challenges in connecting with people, not just obviously I wasn't even thinking about dating. It was really more about friendships. It was about how do I'd go to networking events and not know what to say to people, or not, find it difficult to build close connections. So Ruth, I just wanted to bring you on. You're an important character in the book, and you're the person that I went to for advice throughout my dating process, and I've recreated you as a character in the book. So Naomi, we've got Naomi back too, so we'll bring Naomi back onto the screen too. But the first question I have for you, or we have, is it's been with COVID, it's been in the news that psychologists have had a bumper time with lots of business, because people now more than ever need support. So can you just share a little of your experience, and what is it people are coming to you for at this time?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things we all like to feel is that, safe in the world. And we all had ideas about how that worked. And then, it was a lot about what we did and what we could control and everything. And then, of course, the world turned against us. And all of a sudden, we can't even count on the world being the way we thought it was,
And the loneliness. I remember you describing to me a loneliness epidemic.
Well, look, loneliness is always it's always been the problem. Human beings are tribal. We're meant to live in groups. This sort of modern everybody in little boxes is really not, it's not healthy for human beings. And something like lockdowns really, really show how much we need connection with other people. And when we don't have it, there's a thing called existential loneliness. And I think, that's what we all plug into when we don't have enough connection. And one of the things about your book is about, people want to be seen by other people. They want to know they exist, and that's what a lot of having a relationship is about. And when you're saying for psychologists, I mean, for the first time, I've had to turn a whole lot of people away, which I've never, done before, because so many young people are feeling anxious and stressed by what's happening under COVID. Because especially ones like you who are there at the time where they want to find a partner. And they can't get out there and do the meet in bars and things like that.
So imagining for a minute we are able to meet again soon, because surely this is not going to last much longer. Yeah. But let's go back to like 2012. I came to see you. I hadn't seen you for a few years, and I said, right, it's time to meet a partner, and my plan is to go on one date every week for a year. I'm going to do 52 dates. What was it what was your response?
Well, I think in the beginning I thought maybe it should be 2 dates a week. I didn't think one was enough. As I say to people, because I have a lot of clients who are in that position that you were in, and I say to them, listen, the answer, you need to fail faster. It's about failing fast. It's not about, you have to come with an attitude that I'm not here to meet the love of my life, in 1 week, which, I mean, Naomi was very lucky really to have that experience. But a lot of people, have to sieve a lot of frogs before they meet their prince.
Yeah. Well, is there any mistakes that you see women particularly making?
Well, I'm sure you've written about it in your book, because one of the things I tell people, and I quote you actually, Rebekah, is that it's not just about finding, it's about exposure therapy. It's about actually having more and more experiences with other people. And in the end, like you said, learning more about yourself, learning what you're doing wrong or what you're doing too much, or if your expectations are unrealistic, which I think a lot of women nowadays, they can. I read a great article from Lori Gottlieb, who's an American psychologist. I don't know if you've read, she's written some good books, and it was about her story about settling for Mr. Right.
Yeah.
She said, because she said she kept waiting and always found something wrong. And then when she ended up age 39, 40 and had a baby on her own, she realized that maybe she was too particular. Maybe she was always looking for what was wrong with them instead of what was right with them.
There's a moment in the book where I come to see you and I met someone who was really nice, and you were talking about how, because early on I said, those who hadn't read it, I said I was looking for smart, tall, and fun. That was my list. And I remember you saying, how you go with that kind of thing. And then I came back to you probably 2 years, or maybe even almost 3 years later, saying, I've worked it out. Actually, nice is really important. That should be at the top of the list. Someone who's nice, someone who cares about me, and who cares about the world and what they're doing and things. But and I remember you saying, there's one really quote that stuck in my mind, because I asked you if you saw couples during their divorces, or who were struggling in their relationships after a long time. And I said, what's kind of the thing that you see that distinguishes people that are successful in their long-term relationships? And I remember you saying nice goes a really long way.
Yeah, because relationships are really based on trust. A good relationship is based on the trust that the other person really cares about how you feel about things. And sometimes you have a lot of different opinions or ways of parenting or ways of managing money and everything. But if they respect that you're allowed to have an opinion and that you can actually compromise around the two, so it's a win-win, that guy, and that's a person who has empathy and sympathy and respect for themselves and for other people.
Yeah.
I quote, if I knew that it could count the number of times I've said to people, you can get used to nice. Nice is actually pretty good. It's nice to come home to nice. You've got a lot of other stuff out there, but if you come home to nice, it's really quite, it's quite good. And the interesting thing is, just while we're on that, is that I see a lot of people who've had unsuccessful, not great relationships, and then I don't know, I can't remember if this was exactly what happened with you, but they come to me and they go, look, I'm going out with this guy and he's really nice, but it's sort of boring and I feel sort of uncomfortable. And I go, fabulous. When you're uncomfortable, I'm thrilled, because your comfort zone in the past has not been great. That's why a lot of people who have made bad choices, and there's a reason why they do that. Anybody who's interested in themselves and relationships should read about attachment theory online. Because the one thing I say to a lot of the girls I see is ask them about their mother.
Yes,
if it's a guy, ask him about his mother, because that's
looking for.
That's the relationship. Well, yeah, but it may not be good. If his mother was great, terrific, he's going to love you and respect you and look after you like he loves his mother. But if he has issues because his mother didn't have a good attachment, didn't give him affection, or, was a bit all over the shop, he's going to try and work that out with women. So you got to be careful what you look for. You might find it.
As one final question, is there any advice in terms of forming connections? So I would have nice conversations, but I would find it difficult early on to kind of get to the next level. It was both a friendship thing, but it was also dating. How do you go from surface to a deeper connection?
Okay, so just to go back to what you and Naomi were talking about before, intimacy is actually, and I think I did say this to you when you first came to me and wanted to have closer friends. Yeah. I said to you, intimacy is about vulnerability. If you want to get to that deeper level with people, you've got to be prepared to, show the bits that you're not necessarily thrilled about, about not your strengths, but sometimes your humanity, because that's what people can link to and connect with, because everybody underneath it all has that feeling that, we're not who we'd like to be necessarily, So, I say to people when they're going on dates and everything, don't feel you have, first of all, start off by working on loving yourself. Accept and love yourself. And that's the person you want to take with you to the date, the acceptable, lovable person, despite whatever's happened to you in your family or in your past relationships, start off going that I am lovable, I am acceptable, and then relax and just be interested in the other person. You don't have to be interesting, because if you're too interesting, that threatens them anyway. just
Okay to
relax.
have a laugh. If there's one thing I know about my relationship with
Absolutely.
Stuart, gosh, we still laugh. We
Yeah.
just do. And we're absolutely okay with being just big dags with each other. In fact, there was one part in the book that I think I just laughed, and like this is one thing I do want to say about the book, Rebekah, is there is plenty of laughs in it. Like, it is such a romp, and it's such a page turner. And I think that is a wonderful thing for the readers too, to be completely uplifted, and you are able to laugh at yourself. So I think laughter in the beginning in a relationship too is also how it's going to continue.
Yeah. I think sense of humour is a really important thing in relationships. Life can be hard sometimes, but to be able to take a different perspective and see stand back and see it for what it is really important.
It's so wonderful.
Thank you, Ruth. You have been a wonderful person in my life, and thank you very much for joining
It's been a joy, and I always knew you'd make it.
She has that way, doesn't she?
She has courage,
entrepreneurial, never give up, never say no.
That's right, courage and willingness. Yeah. Okay.
Resilience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Naomi. I think we should bring on Madeleine, I think.
Yeah.
So for those of you who have read the book, one of the favourite characters that everybody brings up is Madeleine. It's funny, I've been doing some interviews for the book, and the people who are interviewing me all want to talk about my friend Madeleine in Sydney. And so I'm really excited you could join us. You are a wonderful friend, and you gave me some incredible advice throughout my journey. And you know Naomi as well. We all, maybe you guys want to share how you know each other. Naomi, I think you're
Naomi's on mute.
Yeah, let me unmute. So I must say, what was fabulous was, as I was reading the book, and I couldn't put it down as the manuscript, I was like, Madeleine, she did the same to me. She held the mirror up and she said, who are you in this? And I was like, you go around. And anyway, one of the most beautiful, beautiful stories, Rebekah, was when you were sitting next to Joe, right in the front row. And, it's just, oh gosh, I was wetting myself with laughter. So, anybody on the call here, if you want a good laugh, read this story. And Madeleine comes in, I think, about halfway through the book, and she was meant to arrive for you.
Thank you.
Your guardian angel, or the person who's just going to really tell you how it is.
Yes, he is a guardian angel. Thank you, Naomi. So I was in a place, if you don't know, called the Landmark Forum, which is part of Landmark Worldwide. I guess, would you call it a personal development?
Yeah, personal professional development. It's that. Yep.
Yeah, program. And Madeleine was at the front of the room, and I remember spotting you and thinking, oh, she's looking at me funny, and I couldn't work out. and I remember seeing this guy, because I went to the Landmark Forum because I wanted to meet men, and it was all I knew about it was that there was all these sessions, and every session you got to sit next to someone different, and I thought, great, I can find a different man to sit next to every time. And then I picked this guy who I thought was really good looking. I was like, I can't sit next to him, he's way out of my league. And I sat next to him, and then I started talking to him. His name was Joe, and I was like, oh. And then it turned out that Joe was your fiance at that time, and now your husband. You have 3 lovely children together, and we met, and I asked Madeleine, how did you end up with this amazing guy? He was obviously lovely, and it looks like Orlando Bloom, but it's also just beautiful person. And I asked you the story. I don't know if you can share a little bit without giving it all away. It is in the book, but
it is a long story, but I think it's interesting listening to all of you, because I think everybody's on a very similar page. And I think the biggest thing about it, I had been actively trying to get a relationship, and it wasn't working. And I think what happened was I finally got resolved that my life wasn't going to be defined by that. I wasn't going to have my life be defined by, whether I had a boyfriend or not. And, by a 13-year-old's list, You know, I remember being 13 and write, you know, what I want for my life. Number one, get a boyfriend. Number two, have babies, you know. Number three, have global career that makes a difference. And, you know, I wrote that list as a 13-year-old, and I finally got resolved I wasn't going to have my life be about that. And so I just started giving myself fully to life. I gave myself to what I cared about, the difference I wanted to make, what I wanted my life to be about. And of course, I was really happy then, you know, I was really happy. And people are attracted to happy people who are doing what they love and are content. So, you know, it was in that space that, and he'd been around, I'd seen him around. He was, like you say in the book, known as Hot Joe. And I wasn't like, I just wasn't even thinking about him like that. So, you know, and then when we started having conversations, that's when I went, oh, actually, maybe this is a thing. And it was like both of you said, you know, Naomi and Rebekah, there was this like very natural state change. It was very natural. It seemed normal. We say now we could have got married that day because it was that obvious to us that we were that was it. And to be clear for everyone, I don't think it's some pie in the sky like I believe in soulmates fantasy either. You know, like it's not like someone descended upon me like that. I think I was in a space where I was really happy and someone came along that was congruent with that or a match for that space. And then I just chose. You're it.
It's an inspiring story. I love the story in the book.
For sure.
Yeah, I was just reading the audiobook this week, and I was reading your story. I cried again. I just love it. Beautiful story. You told me when we met was that you went on a few dates. There was one particular guy, you said he was in a production that you were in, and he asked you on a couple of dates and how you acted in those dates. And then he disappeared and you were devastated. Can you share a little of that story?
Look, I was just trying to do whatever I had to do to make it with someone, you know, like to try and be the person that I thought they might want. And coming from a place of not liking myself very much at that point and going, oh, well, you got to take what you can get. Like, you know, give everything a chance, you know, that kind of thing. I just kept trying to be some other person that I thought was going to be the right one for him. And then more and more compromised, like more and more, I don't know, like lying to myself or even having to remember, hang on, who am I trying to be here in this conversation that's like the person wants? And I knew that was not going to be the way forward.
I remember you saying that you wore clothes that weren't comfortable and you kind of giggled and
I was so quintessentially, I mean, I did women's studies at university, people, right? And there I am in my Spanx and, you know, like extra makeup and all of that, like, you know, giggling an octave above my own voice, just stuff going, who is this person?
I cannot imagine you doing that.
I know, right? And I'm like, I hated myself. I was like, no wonder he's not into it.
Yeah. And then he disappeared. And I remember you saying that you were devastated and you named the babies and you imagined this whole future.
Well, it's that fantasy stuff, isn't it, from the get-go? And I think that is like, you know, as girls particularly, and maybe we're in a new world now. One of my children's non-binary and we're in a very different paradigm for relationship and gender and all those things. But, you know, growing up, I was born in 1974 and, you know, Barbie was it. And you really did fantasize very early on about this is what it's supposed to look like in relationship. And then, you know, if that's the only model, then the moment that it came for me to actually be doing that, I started modeling what I had been, you know, as a child, even though I had, you know, the other woman that raised me, I have my mum and this other woman that looked after us all the time, was the head of women's shelters in South Australia. And I've got 3 very successful businesswoman aunties as role models. And yet there I was trying to emulate Barbie.
Madeleine, I also love the role you play in Rebekah's life. And, you know, it did strike me that all of us in life need somebody who'll stand up to us when we want to play small, or we want to run to our stories, or we want to, you know, feel sorry for ourselves. And yet actually we do need people to stand up for us, to make a stand for us. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about how actually you had quite an incongruous start almost to your friendship and your relationship. Was it what I would call a smooth and easy transition into a deep connection?
Yeah, sure. I remember very early on, so we met, we had lunch, Madeleine told me her story, and then not long after that, we had another conversation. And then Madeleine gave me some very honest feedback about her impression of me when we first met. I don't know, I'm happy for you to share that if you'd like, Madeleine.
Yeah. Look, I was fundamentally confused by you. You know, I was just like, I don't get it. And what I didn't get was, how does this woman, who is, anybody that meets you in an instant goes, this is someone who's a go-getter. This is someone who is driven in the best possible way, you know, someone who masters stuff, goes after things. And I was like, and successful, you know, repeatedly successful. So I was like, how does that person be so lame about themselves? Like, I just couldn't put it together. Like, how could you not see what other people see about you?
Well, I think in response to that, I think thanks, Madeleine. Thank you for being honest with me. And I think if it really triggers, because no one had ever said that kind of stuff to me before. I think I had thought it in my head, but hearing it out loud was like, oh, all those fears I have in my head, you know, some of them are actually true. And it made me think, I better think about this. I better think about, who am I actually? Who do I want to be? What do I want to contribute in the world? How do I want to, who do I want to be in the world? It's not about how I want to come across. It's like, who do I want to be? And that started me on a journey of questioning, I guess, and of starting to look more inward. I mean, I think possibly how I ended up so confused was I was trying, like you said before, I was trying to be somebody else. I was trying to be, I still remember going out to lunch with Mia Friedman when I was like in my early 20s and just going, wow, imagine being like her. Like, she's so beautiful and effortless and funny. And so I just thought that I wanted to be like that. And I tried so hard to be like that. And I just wasn't. That's not me, and it will never be me. And so, but Madeleine encouraged me to start looking inwards and going, what, you know, I do have some things about me that are good, right? Like, I have some traits that are, that work. And so it was more put me on a journey to start looking at who I actually was and stop trying to emulate others that I thought I should be. And that was not an instant switch. It was a process through lots of dates and rejection and thinking and writing notes and things. And eventually I got to a point where I'd kind of, shaved off all the layers and was like, okay, this is me. This is the me that I want to put out into the world.
And I thought you really covered a lot of topics brilliantly in the book that I was really surprised about. Like, there's a point where you're starving and you're just angry because you thought you needed to be skinnier or whatever. And I thought, gosh, there's so many people who are going to read this and think, oh my goodness, I'm not alone, or I'm, whatever it is, I'm too short, I'm too this, I'm too that. And we think it's the physicalness, whereas actually it is coming from within, and I when I speak to many of people I know who've coming out of long-term relationships, what are new people looking for? They're looking for joy, lightness and ease, grace, I say to my daughter, ease and grace. It's, and life doesn't have to be difficult, but we really, really overthink and overthink and overthink and overthink to try and make this perfect world that never will be. Life is not perfect. We're imperfect human beings, and we just gorgeous the way we are. And that is the beauty of life, is our imperfection and the pursuit of understanding and learning, which is absolutely wonderful. I do think it's important, though, don't you, that we, like I said to you, Rebekah, I'm not sure you should tell people the end of the story, but apparently they need to know the end of the story. And if anybody looks at your Instagram and knows that on Sunday you were up at 5 a.m. with 2 children making cubby houses, I'm sure they're going to try to work out. But that moment and that transition and how Rod showed up, but also the insecurities that still played out, because of course it was a very challenging time for Rod, particularly, and what was going on in his life.
Yes. And with that, maybe we should bring on our third wonderful special guest. Thank you so much, Madeleine, for joining us.
Amazing. It's so
welcome.
wonderful to see you.
In both
Good to see you.
lives, mine and Naomi's. It's lovely to see you. And we're going to bring on, as our last special guest, the wonderful Rod, my happy ending. As Naomi said, I started advertising the book and I was running these ads and they didn't have a the ending. People would always like write into the ad, did you find someone? Did you find someone? And it turns out nobody wants to read a dating book unless they know that, you know, you're successful.
Happy ending.
Not that this is just a dating book or a relationship. It's hopefully a lot more than that as a story, but the story does have a very happy ending. And everything that I learned through the process paid off as I met Rod. And so we had a few questions that we wanted to ask Rod about us meeting and, you know, your impressions. And you'd been on a few other dates as well. So we were going to ask about what was different about this one.
Wow.
Naomi.
Naomi, would you like to ask?
Yes. Look, you guys did meet on an app.
Yes.
And, you know, which I think is really interesting, because that's a very intentional thing to do, is to go on an app.
Yeah.
But how come this was different? Like, you know, in the sweeping left or right or whatever they do on those apps, I'm so young and groovy, I really know all these things. But you were at this point in life, you both were looking for connection. Yeah, you were on an app. So tell us about that, and tell us about your journey there too, Rod.
Gosh, well, when we met, I'd already have been into long-term relationships, and I was like 2 months out of my previous relationship, and I think whilst Rebekah had 138 dates, I'd only swiped 2 or 3 times on the Tinder. So, you know, while she was really trying to find a relationship, I was you know, there to meet someone new, whilst you know, connecting with people was really important to me. So I hadn't been on the swiping game for too long, and we met and we connected, and it was just something completely different. Beautiful thing.
Tell us about the first moment you met her.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I want your perspective, because
My perspective?
I've had hers. I've read the book, and
you've read the book.
But I want your perspective.
What?
And I want to know, like, what you think is different. Just not, no, just in terms of for any other women out there that might be going into what was it that's different?
What was clearly different, and this sort of goes back to some of the things we've already talked about, was that we'd both shed all of this having to pretend to be somebody that we weren't thing, and it was really clear that, you know, you're being yourself. You weren't pretending to be someone else.
How did you know that?
The types of conversations that we had were completely different to any other conversations that I had on any other dates. Going to Ruth's point from earlier, I think within about 10 minutes, you were asking me about my relationship with my family.
It wasn't like I was drilling you, though. It was natural.
Not too much of a drill, but it was like, you know, the really meaningful and connected conversations that we had. And for someone that I just met, that was an amazing thing.
Yes, and I remember you telling me this story. And so when you left, you both, like, what was your instant reaction? Like, what were you feeling as you were leaving, Rod, to go home?
I felt like I'd you know, stumbled across gold, I think.
Oh,
It was just one of those moments where a connection just happened that was meant to happen. And and it was also natural. And like I said, we weren't pretending to be anybody that we weren't. And we just clicked. And very content, relaxed and grounded, I think, is how I felt.
Kissed you on the cheek in the taxi on the way home.
Kissed me on the cheek in the taxi. And I got home and read your blog on my bed. Apparently she's this author, and I looked up one of these articles and sent you a message about it.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. So
but then there was a period where then it was just silence, wasn't it? Because other things went on in your life, and that was very confusing for you, Rebekah. And maybe we don't need to even necessarily explore it, but I think it is so important what happens to our own head. Like, you think you've made a connection, you think everything's good, and Rebekah's understanding of what was going on in that time was all about her, when obviously it wasn't.
Yeah. I spent the entire, so we texted the next morning, I think about 9 o'clock, and then I heard nothing for about until the late Sunday evening. So it was, almost 2 days. And I spent that entire Sunday staring at my phone, willing it to text to come in. And then you said, we can share what happened.
Yes.
We don't have to share the lovely ending of the book, but we can share what happened.
Yeah. So sadly, my father was killed in a cycling accident 8 o'clock in the morning, the very next morning. So hence why I went off the radio for a bit. But what was beautiful was that you were there, and you connected with me, and you supported me through that when we'd only met each other once. So that was a beautiful thing too.
Yeah.
Definitely deepened the relationship pretty quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, as soulmates, you quickly became, and I suppose that's the thing, because people, when they talk about love, they say, oh, is this the one? Is this the one? Is this the one? And then the one just shows up. And how is it that we know? But it's when we allow ourselves to trust our own feeling and our own experience, and often we don't trust, or we've set ourselves a checklist or a bar or something, and then we're measuring up to that versus the experience that we're currently having. So you said about long-term relationships, and why do you think there's those that work and those that don't, Rod, now that you're the wise one and marrying an author who has revealed so much in her book?
It's all about, powerful choices, I guess, is the best way to describe it. You decide that you're going to make a life together, and you make it work, and that's what we do every day, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I remember now that you've got 2 little ones, and every day is not always smooth, and there's not always the perfect amount of sleep that goes on, and there's the juggle between careers, but that is actually what family is, and it is what relationship is, and it's not perfect. And Rebekah, you mentioned that Cameron was a melding of a few subjects. Oh, look, there's a beautiful photo of the 4 of you. How gorgeous. But how much is fiction and how much is real? And will people recognise themselves in the book, perhaps, those 137 dates?
It's funny, I'm getting a lot of messages on Facebook now from these friends. I'd connected with on Facebook who'd been on one date. We might have friended each other or something, but it didn't go out again. And I'm getting all these messages saying, am I in the book? And I'm like, who are you again? I can't remember. And then there was one the other day, and I was like, are you the farmer guy that said that they kill their firstborns? And then he's like, yes. And I was like, oh, you are in the book. Anyway, so it's I would say the interactions are all real. I've played a little bit with the timing of some things, the date timing, all of the relationship dates that's all real. The career, the business story that runs alongside, there's a lot of lessons in the book that come from business. So when I'm building this business, raising capital in particular, I'm kind of figuring out stuff about, Mel from Canva, for example, is a big character in the book, and she gives me lots of great advice, and I apply her advice, which was for business, to finding a relationship, and I apply some of the stuff that I learned about relationships to capital raising and to building the business. So I mean, I guess in turn back to the original question is what's real, what's fiction? It's all real. I don't think there's nothing which I came up with in my own head. I might have filled in little details like that he was wearing a pink shirt, and I can't remember, whether that particular date was wearing a pink shirt, or what the music was that was on the radio. So I think I filled in some of the details like that to make it a more vivid story. But all of the conversations are real. And yeah, that Cameron character is the one character, really. There might be one other where I blended a few people into one, really just to simplify the story and to try and protect the anonymity, the identity of the person from being too obvious. Although I'm sure they'll recognize themselves. They'll know that was my conversation, or that was my that was us in New York or whatever. But yes, so I guess hopefully that answers your question. There was one other point I wanted to make just on the Rod stuff, which was about when someone's the one. I think what was different, that's something that I get asked probably more than anything, is that after 138 dates, how did you know that he was it? And I think, there was a lot of lessons leading up to the last date. There was one huge transformation that happened within me, which was about letting go of something big that happened right before I met Rod. That Rod was my next date 2 weeks after that. And I don't know totally if that's what led me to Rod. And if I hadn't gone through that, then I wouldn't have met. Or was he just the right person and we hadn't met yet? I don't know. But although it was quite obvious that we connected, our conversation felt really familiar. I'd also say that I didn't feel like it was kind of God going like, this is, bestowing on me this one person who is my soulmate, and that this person is going to make everything right, in the world. It was more like, it was definitely a decision that I made in my head when I was looking at Rod across the table, and we were talking about what makes a great teacher. Because Rod was talking about being a teacher, and then a university teacher of teachers, and why he became a teacher. And I just remember thinking, this guy is it. But it was me deciding that this guy is it. It wasn't like it wasn't like waiting for some magic thing to happen. It was like, I'm going to make this guy is it. And then it was some advice from Madeleine. And it just so happened that Rod had the same perspective on relationships. Like, Rod you were very clear quite early on that you are a forever person, and that you want a relationship forever. You want to be committed and to make it work. And that, I don't know if I can share this, but one of the reasons why your other relationships didn't work is that you felt like the women were kind of shopping, or were looking for an ultimate person. And that as soon as they realized that you were not, the ultimate person that would like make everything perfect all the time.
I don't know what was wrong with them, but
we still have arguments, and like we still have differences of opinions.
Of course, yeah.
Every day is perfect or anything.
Just as we're beginning to bring this to a wrap, there's also another very important character in this book, and that is you got very efficient at the actual date process.
Oh yes.
And the waiter or the waitress at the and how they had to get into the giggle, because it's just such a wonderful character. And if they ever make this into a book, into a movie, which I absolutely think they should, I can absolutely see that character will be this lovely kind of backdrop to the whole thing. That character as the waiter or the waitress in the very efficient dating process.
Yes. Well, we didn't talk about that. I mean, one thing, and then I will share the dating process quickly. Like, it was 138 dates, 1 date a week, and then as I go through the process, I work out how to run a pipeline. I looked at it very much from a business perspective, and I even drawed the kind of dating sales funnel the same way that I had a sales funnel for work. And I just thought all these candidates at the top, and then I'll build different filters, like screening calls, and I always met in the same restaurant, the same time, and I looked at it as like art class, or netball or something, and so every week I do the same thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like I had to do that in order to make it work. It's like raising capital in some ways. You know, you have to be out there doing all the pitches, and then eventually something magic happens. And if you hadn't done all those first ones, would you have learned everything? You know, I don't know.
It's true, but I just think that that is such a beautiful character who sits underneath the whole thing and has to be in on the giggle as well. Have you ever eaten here before?
Yes.
Do I need to go through the menu?
Sorry,
I have to be in on the giggle. So it's really, really great. And of course, it was going to be efficient, you know, and I guess that's the point. You were intentional, you're efficient, and you've chosen to share this gorgeous, gorgeous story with the world. And I think you make the world a better place for doing so, because others then can say, hey, look what's possible. And you really, really worked at it. So I noticed that our hour is pretty much come. I've kept an eye on the questions and I haven't seen any particular questions coming through. Lots of praise, lots of insight, and coming along there, and thanking you very much. But congratulations on your book, Rebekah. Congratulations, Rod, on your wonderful family, and also the role that I now understand you have educating educators at the highest level in the whole of New Zealand now, which is amazing. Madeleine, it was so delightful to see you, so wonderful, and Ruth as well, the critical role that that professionals play in supporting people when they get so lost in their heads. And I think it's really important. So thank you, everybody, for coming online. I encourage you to get your own copy of 138 Dates. I recommend it to so many of my friends. So I'm sure it'll be a massive, massive success. So thank you.
And yes, there is an audiobook. There's the answer.
It's coming. Not till the beginning of October, though. So
Yeah.
But
That'd
yes,
be wonderful.
it should be, if you're out in Australia, it should be in all bookstores now.
Yeah.
Except you probably can't get to them in Sydney, so you need to order online.
We can order online at
We've shared
Booktopia.
the link.
Yeah.
And in New Zealand, I know there's some people in New Zealand on this as well. I've shared the link to New Zealand. New Zealand, it comes out into bookstores on the 16th of July.
So wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks to everyone just watching for your support as well.
See you.